This is AM Agenda. With me this morning, the Shadow Parliamentary Secretary for Health, Nick Champion, and Liberal Senator Zed Seselja. Gentlemen, good morning.
Morning.
Senator, first to you on the position on the submarines. Is it clear in your head where things are at? Because it's confused a lot of people.
Look, I think it's very clear that what we're going to have is a competitive evaluation process. This is a process that was used, I understand, by the former Labor government, I think most recently for the acquisition of helicopters. Yeah. I think what's most important is that what we're going to have is a competitive process. Now, if the Labor Party's argument is that we should have some sort of open tender, I think that's a significant problem when it comes to the acquisition of submarines. That's not how we've done it for major defence procurement in the past. And I would say this, Kieran, that if the Labor Party are so interested in defence industry jobs, why did we lose 1 in 10 under the Labor Party as they slashed $16 billion from the defence budget? And
I guess the other question to put to Labor, and you're the member for Wakefield in the northern suburbs of Adelaide, so you've got a keen interest in this story.
I've got a lot of sub workers in my electorate.
So why did Labor do nothing on it for 6 years?
Well, we didn't do nothing. We put $200 million in. We had a study which was the beginning of a process which would lead to a competitive tendering with set criteria, competitive tender with set criteria, and a clear arrangement.
That's what you were doing for 6 years.
By which you would procure submarines. Well, this is not something you can, the old saying, act in haste, repent at leisure. And what we see here is a Prime Minister who's done a sort of handshake deal with the Prime Minister of Japan, and then they've sort of gone away and convinced their respective defence bureaucracies. That's what's in the Australian today. We know from other reports in the Australian it was intimately involved now in the leadership vote that they had this week, and it's also involved in a South Australian Senate pre-selection. So we've got a whole lot of sort of deal making going on when we should have a competitive tender done by experts.
Is it appropriate that the Prime Minister do a handshake deal with his Japanese counterpart and not take it through the National Security Committee and all the various processes before saying to a foreign leader in the context of a free trade negotiation that we're going to be on board with their subs?
Well, I don't accept the premise, Kieran. I don't.
The Prime Minister hasn't rejected the premise.
Well, as I say, I don't know. Those are reports. What I do know is that, of course, all of this goes through the National Security Committee of Cabinet, and it's going through a competitive process. So, any argument otherwise is simply false. And as I say, the contrast, of course, is as you pointed out to Nick, they did nothing for 6 years. There's this idea, they were doing studies. It's clear that they didn't move on this for many years. All the while, you were slashing $16 billion from the defence budget. So what did that do for jobs in the defence industry? 1 in 10 went. So if you were so serious about defence jobs then, you showed no sign of it for the last 6 years.
And when it comes to this decision, my understanding is that there's been no final decision by the National Security Committee, even though there might be some discussion had between the two leaders of Japan and Australia. The National Security Committee has not signed off on this acquisition. So the point is, as Zed says, the substance of this is it's still going to be competitive and open.
This is an opaque deal. It's an opaque deal. How can anybody tell what's going on? How can defence industry analysts tell what's going on? How can the opposition tell what's going on? The Prime Minister changes these arrangements depending on who he's in the room with. I mean, and that's a very serious matter because this is a defence procurement that will take a long time because it's going to go over decades. Over decades. It's probably the most important bit of defence procurement we will make as a nation, not just for shipbuilding, but for the defence of the country. And, around our region, there is a massive purchase of submarines in our region, probably the biggest in history of sophisticated weaponry. We've got to get this right, and instead we've got a Prime Minister making, opaque and secret deals, and how are the rest of us supposed to make a judgment about that?
Well, Senator,
given this, can you get bipartisan
this is probably going to be
in that situation?
It's described as the biggest acquisition in Australian history. This submarine acquisition. Should the Prime Minister explain to the Parliament today exactly what's been discussed with the Japanese and clear that up? Because he was asked yesterday, did he reach a handshake deal with the Japanese Prime Minister? And he didn't answer it directly.
Well, the first thing I'd say is I agree with what Nick said in terms of the importance of this, but we're certainly not going to take the Labor approach, which Bill Shorten expressed down in South Australia, and basically said, well, you know, remember World War II, and therefore, you know, we shouldn't.
Look, don't make xenophobic.
That's what he said.
Don't make xenophobic.
No, it was Bill Shorten who did.
Don't try and recreate.
It was Bill Shorten who did.
Correctness.
You're very sensitive on that,
cover
Nick.
this.
You're very sensitive on that, Nick. Why do you interject on that point? Is what I'm saying not true?
This is a slur.
No, that's exactly. It was a slur.
I was at that.
Yeah, and we all heard what he said.
I was at that.
Well, I can see what's on TV.
Slur.
No,
deliberately twisting.
Bill Shorten was
recreating
very sensitive,
sort of
very touchy on this point, Nick.
in order to cover your own.
Let's hear Senator Seselja on it.
I can see why Nick didn't want me to finish this point. The sensitivity is extraordinary. We saw Bill Shorten. His words are on the record. He was out there stirring up a union crowd, and he was pointing out
workers.
Workers
in the industry. He was at
a union rally.
Let's hear
he was at a union rally, and he was appealing to xenophobia, and that is absolutely what he was doing. So we're not going to get into that game. What we are going to do is to make sure we have a real and genuine competitive process, get the best outcome firstly for the defence of our nation. And secondly, to ensure we have Australian jobs in the defence industry. You can't do that if you're cutting $16 billion.
I want to finish. No, I've got to move on because I do want to touch on this other story, which is of national significance as well. This policy on border protection. The Human Rights Commission has slammed offshore processing, which both sides agree with. The key point that I put to Tanya Plibersek, Nick Champion, is that surely the government should have some credit within this discussion for the humanitarian result of reducing the number of children in detention.
Well, it was the Rudd government that sort of restarted offshore processing. And
this government does turnbacks. Labor hasn't agreed to that.
But just let me answer it. It was the Rudd government that restarted offshore processing. We would have had the Malaysian agreement before that had it not been stymied by the High Court and then the Parliament.
It was the Rudd government that ended it and then restarted it.
Well, the Liberals voted with the Greens against the Malaysian thing. And I take your point, right? I was, I guess, on the backbench at the time. You know, I wasn't backwards and coming forwards on this issue. But look, I think the critical thing when we look at this is to, you know, by all means, deter people for coming by boat because it's dangerous for them. And obviously that reduces people in mandatory detention, which is a good thing.
The 30 claims of sexual assault against children is a shocking part of this report. We've only got about a minute left, but quickly, Senator, could you incorporate that into the current Royal Commission into abuse of children?
Well, look, those allegations should obviously be fully investigated, and if there's any truth in them, then it's absolutely abhorrent and people need to be brought to justice. But on this policy, there is no doubt that we have had great success, and it's a humanitarian success. By stopping those illegal boat arrivals, hasn't been one for 200 days. I think there's only been one in the last year or so. We have stopped the deaths at sea, and there were over 1,000 over the last few years. There were 50,000 unlawful arrivals. There's been virtually none in the last year. That's a good outcome, and we're removing children from detention. So I think that's a great success.
Gentlemen, thanks for your time this morning.